It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman. I'd like to welcome back to the show Father Jeffrey Kirby, author of We Are the Lord's, a Catholic Guide to Difficult End-of-Life Questions. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show, Father.
Good to be back, Kyle. Thank you.
Good. So what made you want to write a book about difficult end-of-life decisions and questions?
Yeah, so much of my writing as an author has been really inspired by pastoral experience. As a parish priest, even though I have academic training, there's not a whole lot of time. So oftentimes it's things that come up in pastoral ministry, especially when I see patterns where people are seeking truth or they want guidance or need help or there's some role for evangelization or greater catechetics. And that was the case with end-of-life questions. More and more I was just getting called either to hospitals or hospice care centers or homes that were under hospice care. And the same questions just kept coming up. And I thought, we should have a resource. And honestly, as much as I looked, I found a lot of academic resources, but I didn't find just a practical, easy to read, hand it to the average Catholic that could help them answer some of these questions. So that was what originally inspired this book.
And whenever we think of end-of-the-life questions, a lot of times we think of physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, and it seems like those two issues have really gained a lot of popularity recently and acceptance. Why do you think that is?
Yes, I think that more and more what Pope St. John Paul II called the culture of death, more and more that is pervading and winning the hearts of a lot of people of goodwill. It's winning the hearts of believers. And so when we approach life, in the sense of it has dignity to the degree that it measures up to a certain quality or it measures up to a certain utility, well, then it has dignity. So we've gotten very comfortable as a culture and a people of putting conditions on dignity, and that is not, the proper way to look at it for a healthy society. It's certainly not how a believer understands that. So as we see that understanding of dignity diminish or become more and more conditioned, it becomes acceptable in our culture and in our laws to allow that. So exactly, physician-assisted suicide, it's on the increase. We see more and more states ratifying laws. We see more and more areas of flexibility with hospice care in terms of pain management, in terms of the providing of nutrition, hydration. So it's a whole trend. As one person commented to me, that the culture of death feels that it has won the beginning of life, and now the attack is on the end of life. And I think as believers, we have to really be aware of that this is the same battle.
Can you talk about what the church teaches about death and why the way that our lives end is so important?
Yeah, so obviously as Christians, we do believe in eternal life. We know that life itself is a tremendous gift. However, we would say it's not an absolute gift in this way. Some time ago, I was invited to be on a local radio show, and they said, we want someone to come on who's going to argue that no matter what, you have to provide for the preservation of life. And I said, well, that's not really Catholic teaching. I don't know if I'm your person. Well, needless to say, I wasn't invited. But that's not our view. There are times when our teaching would say that we should allow the natural process of death to play itself out. When medical care won't serve a good, when the body is shutting down, when there's no hope for survival and treatment would cause just further distress to the body or the soul of the patient. So for us, obviously, death is when the soul leaves the body, and we realize that life in this earth is a gift, but it's not absolute. And there are times when there is a certain area for discernment and what we call extraordinary care that can morally be passed on, that a person doesn't have to accept that care.
I think a lot of times with any of these moral issues, a lot of times it's seen that the teachings of the church make it more difficult for us. Have you seen in your time as a priest that the church's wisdom on death has helped people or families face the end of their life?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think going back to the culture of death, I think with that is, we become frighteningly comfortable with approaching other people as burdens, and of making people feel as if they are burdens. In a healthy society, the sick and the suffering, those with special needs, are seen as blessings and opportunities for selfless service, for the community to go deeper in its service of the most vulnerable. In an unhealthy society, or society that's marked by this culture of death, anything that's going to make me uncomfortable or cause me to go the extra mile or cause me, this further service is a burden, and it has to be stopped. And that's what we find more and more common. So for a lot of times people will say, oh, the church's teachings they're so difficult, or such a heavy cross and so on. But really what they're saying by that in many respects is that, well, my loved one's sufferings is more than I can bear, right? And I think the church's teachings are there to protect the vulnerable and to make sure that they're cared for. Give me an example, Kyle. There's a huge battle with the providing of nutrition, hydration, so food and water, when someone is seriously ill. And they say, well, you know what? I've heard this. I've heard this in hospitals, that they're going to die anyway,
right?
And the idea is that no, this is a human being that must be cared for and cherished and respected until the actual death. You can imagine if I were to say to you, we're not going to change the person's bedding, or we're not going to change your adult diaper, because they're going to die anyway, right? It's barbaric.
Well, I'm going to die eventually, if that's the only factor that matters.
That's a great point. Right. So you can imagine, right, exactly. If we applied that logic across the board, it would expose how ridiculous and cruel it is. And yet we find that more and more common. So I have found that the church's teachings are oftentimes a great source of protecting the vulnerable, but also ordering and reminding us of our call to selfless service and to authentic care.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Father Jeffrey Kirby. The book is We Are the Lord's, a Catholic Guide to Difficult End-of-Life Questions. And there's so many different ways that things can go and different decisions that need to be made. It's hard to just say there's one specific response in any situation, but are there some basic principles that we should keep in mind when we're making these kind of end-of-life decisions?
Yeah, so in the book, so if someone were to just pick up the book and say they're in a hospital and there's urgent questions, in the intro, I asked them, please flip immediately to Chapter 7.
Right.
Chapter 7 has 25, very quick Q&A. And incidentally, St. Benedict Press, the publisher, Tam Books, who published the book, are going to make about 1 to 1.5 minute videos on each of those questions that'll be available in the near future.
Oh, good.
So those are quick ones. But in Chapter 6, 3 major principles are provided to help in moral discernment. So maybe there's more time for someone, which the other chapters then developed, the notion of redemptive suffering, notion of life as a gift. So all these other chapters, if there's time, that a person can really develop the theological backdrop. Mm-hmm. But Chapter 6 provides those 3 principles. The first is there's an objective order. There is right and wrong. We're weighing options. We're not just sitting there determining what is right, what is wrong. But there's an order that as believers we accept, we acknowledge, we have to respect. So, for example, nutrition, hydration. We cannot starve someone to death, right? Pain management. We cannot purposely overdose a person claiming that it's pain management when actually we know that we are seeking and intending to take the person's life, right, et cetera, and so on. That's the first principle, this objective order, this moral truth that's there to guide us. And then secondly is understanding our human vocation. We all have a human vocation. It means I clean someone when they're dirty. It means I feed someone when they're hungry. We have a human vocation. And within that human vocation, we have specific vocations. So moral discernment, the church very much takes into account the responsibility we have to other people. Are you married? Do you have children? Are you taking care of an elderly parent? Are you a leader of a community that provides an indispensable service, and so on? All these are parts as we kind of approach these moral questions. And there is within moral truth, a certain discernment of benefits and burdens in terms of treatment, not people, treatment. And that's the second principle. The third is that there are treatments or procedures that are ordinary, which means we have to do them. They're morally obligatory, or extraordinary means they're morally optional. And people might be surprised that some of the things that can be morally optional at times. Like, remember, for us as Catholics, life is not an absolute good. There are times when we can allow the natural dying process to play itself out.
Mm-hmm. Is there a general rule to apply for that? Because, some could say that extraordinary means would be providing nutrition via a tube or something like that. That's not a natural way to feed somebody. So how do we apply these principles?
Yes, I would say that probably the one thing that can help us most in terms of ordinary, extraordinary, is that we always approach it as Catholics in a holistic way. So if I were to talk to a hospice nurse or a medical doctor, they assess ordinary or extraordinary in terms of the procedures themselves. That's it. So a feeding tube, yes, that's extraordinary. A breathing tube, that's this, and so on and so on.
Okay.
For us as Catholics, there's a bigger picture. We look at moral truth. We look at the person's, responsibilities within the community. So our first thing is that we might use the same language as a medical community, but as Catholics, we need a far more holistic understanding of those words. That's the first one. The second one is, and rule of thumb goes to the heart of your question, which is that the illness itself is what should take life, right? So not the suspension of food, not, an overdose of pain medication, but the illness itself is what should take life. And we should not purposely or intentionally feed that along, So I think those might be some general helps to people.
When should we start thinking about or planning our own death?
Yesterday. Right? So I think it's so important, I think, that every Catholic, from the time we're 6 or 7 years old, we learn the Hail Mary. In that prayer, we ask Our Lady, to be with us now and at the hour of our death. Like, as Catholics, as believers in the resurrection, we're should be comfortable with talking about death. And I think that, in particular, as we get older, it's important that we have a medical proxy. That's the person who knows our intentions, knows our beliefs, and will respect them. I think also, advanced directives, they have their place. We have to be cautious about the ones we select. But I think it's important. I think also planning funerals, to indicate to loved ones, what we want, what we don't want. So I think the more we get comfortable and the sooner we do it, the better. Because truth be told, if we don't do it, then that will fall on another loved one, another family member. And if they're not readily available, it will fall on the state. In terms of an act of charity to our loved ones, we should have things in order. And in terms of our own beliefs, we should make sure that things like this do not fall to the state.
Yeah, there's so much that you cover in here, and I think, whether it be preparing for ourselves or dealing with a loved one, there's a lot of things that a lot of people don't even think about until you're in that situation. So it's good to kind of run through these things ahead of time and be able to tell somebody, hey, if I'm ever in this situation, make sure this is, what happens to me, things like that. You talk about having a proxy, if you are a proxy, all kinds of different topics that people are just going to have to pick up the book to find out more about it. So where can people get a book, and where would they be able to watch those videos when they come out?
Yeah, so all of that will be available through TAN Books, St. Benedict Press. Those will be available. You can get the book. Eventually the videos will be released through TAN and St. Benedict Press. The book can also be found on Amazon or any local Catholic bookstore. And I want to stress, Kyle, this is a book that was born from pastoral experience. It's practical. It's readable. It really is meant to help people who might be in the trenches or who are planning for the future.
Yeah, definitely check it out. It's We Are the Lord's, a Catholic Guide to Difficult End-of-Life Decisions by Father Jeffrey Kirby. Thanks again, Father Kirby, for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kyle. Take care.